So how exactly have the markets been reacting or changing, and where are the best opportunities for portfolios? And joining me now to answer this and more is Stephen Katzenellenbergen, who's a senior executive and private wealth manager at NFB. Thank you very much for your time this evening. I think perhaps let's just start with that. The coronavirus and the outbreak that we saw just reminded us how volatile markets can be, and really the impact on emerging markets like South Africa could be at their mercy.
Sure. I mean, I think that there's no doubt in terms of China's relevance on the global field. Their GDP accounts for roughly 16% of global GDP, and in monetary terms, that's over $17 trillion of GDP in the world. So, there definitely is an impact. I think, although with that said, I think markets are still assessing the long-term implications. So, if you look at previous epidemics, the link between market performance and the epidemics is quite, tenuous. And at this stage, the Chinese look to have done a good job at containing it. But I think, the market and the world in general is quite unsure, as to where that's going. So if you look at most market reactions, to the virus, you've seen most indices or global indices have retracted or come down. But I think that's more a short-term reaction. If you look over the longer term, markets still remain, relatively positive over the last year or so. But I think, the one of the issues here is that globally markets are priced for perfection. So, in other words, if anything goes wrong or derails, that perfection, the liquidity, consumer demand, and so on, it can have a knock-on effect. So the virus in itself may be relatively inconsequential, but when you stack it up against the current global environment, you could have either a short or a lasting impact.
Yeah, and I'm very interested to know if there's been a readjustment of people's portfolios, or have people been calling to readjust their portfolios in terms of investments, given what they're seeing with the coronavirus?
Our view is that it's a bit preemptive to do that. Again, if we look at, previous epidemics or global epidemics, the market seems to have digested that quite quickly and moved on. So I think, I don't think it's necessarily a buy the dip opportunity, but it's definitely a watch and wait, because emerging market and Asia emerging markets definitely a great investment opportunity, and one not to turn your head away from. I think if we can sit here in 3 or 6 months' time and we're able to say it's done and out the way, we'll be better positioned to do something. If we're sitting here in 6 months' time and there's still knock-on effects, I think the implications, could be much broader. But for now, advice to most investors is rather just to be patient and don't make any, rash decisions, either putting money in or pulling money out of specific markets or areas.
For those that are crazy enough to not listen to people like yourselves who are in the know about this watch and wait policy, where would those opportunities be? Let's start from a global perspective and then bring it back home to South Africa.
Well, I mean, the one probably fairly obvious benefactor is going to be global healthcare. So firstly, just from a product perspective, masks and utensils and other bits and pieces, you may find people developing online health assessments, which could be quite attractive. I think another knock-on effect, and you're already seeing it in parts of the Alibaba group, is growth in e-commerce. Because you've got a huge number of people that are, for all intents and purposes, quarantined. They can't leave their homes. So what that's going to do is turn people online. Yeah. To get their fruit and veggie, to get their fast-moving consumable goods. And in fact, if you look back to SARS back in 2003, that's when Alibaba's big online retail platform was launched. And that was actually a launch pad for that platform, with people turning to, well, at that stage, and possibly in China, less traditional, sources of purchasing. Yeah. So I think the numbers are they're expecting a 10 or 15% increase in e-commerce just over this year in China.
And what about South Africa?
I think South Africa, what may be more of a position of righting the position. So, what you're going to have now is you're going to have supply chain dislocations globally. And when things right themselves, you're going to have a massive industry restock. So I think if we're well positioned to support those industry restocks, bearing in mind that China may not have the capacity because they've been offline for a couple of weeks. So if we can fill at least part of that gap, there may be opportunities in our commodity and manufacturing sectors to take advantage of that.
Music to my ears. The manufacturing could do with a boost. Thank you, as always, Stephen, for those insights.